Political commentator Alys Denby joins me now. Alys is the deputy editor of CapX. So much to talk about, so much to get opinions on. Emily Thornberry being one of them who we were just speaking to before the break there. And it's all about Keir Starmer. So Keir Starmer comes out yesterday, addresses this European gathering, and he says, oh, don't worry about us. We'll get on with making Brexit work. Now, I tell you, Emily was talking about how the Conservative Party is infighting and they didn't get Brexit done properly, she says, because of all the infighting. I think it's going to be a heck of a week for Labour, depending on what happens to Mr Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I do think Keir Starmer slightly strains credibility on Brexit, given that he was the architect of Labour's disastrous Brexit strategy. He wanted to have a second referendum. He hinted that he would, in fact, campaign to overturn the result of the original referendum. So I suppose for supporters of Brexit, it's nice to see that he's come into the fold. But, I mean, do we really believe him on this? And as for the kind of nitty-gritty...
Do you believe him?
I do. I mean, I think that this shows what a kind of cynical and calculating politician he actually is. I think it's pretty clear that he thinks we'd be better off if we'd have never left. But he now thinks that that's not going to be a vote-winning strategy anymore.
So if it gets him in power, he'll say whatever you want him to say.
Classic politician.
Sadiq Khan, though, I mean, a lot of people are saying he's on manoeuvres because he's come out and said we should rejoin the single market, the customs union, although not fully return to the EU.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair enough for the Mayor of London to say that. He's got a very different kind of electorate, and clearly with London's kind of strength in services and so on, it would be better for Londoners to stay in the single market. Perhaps Sadiq Khan does have an eye to what might happen with this Beergate investigation. I have to say, I think it would be quite funny if Keir Starmer ended up being the only person to resign over breaking COVID rules when we know everyone was at it.
Well, Emily Thornberry said, he says constantly, I'm not going to be fined. I actually don't like that assertion that they're so confident.
We can't presume to know what the police are going to do.
Unless they do know.
Well, there's questions about that. Do you think he will appeal it? I mean, we're trying to get... It was very slippery
But he said, Emily Thornberry was very straight there, he is not going to be fined, she said.
I mean, that's very confident. I mean, come on, the guy was drinking a beer. It's really not the worst thing that anyone's ever done.
Rishi Sunak got a fine for standing near a cake.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. I think it would be a kind of amusing outcome. And God knows what would happen to Labour in that situation.
Yeah. So you don't think Labour is a transformed party? I mean, if you go back to the Tony Blair tactics, he knew he had to move beyond Labour's core voters. He knew he had to bring in a wider audience. Starmer actually is applying the same tactics. He knows he's got to appeal to a wider audience, and the only way he can do that is to support Brexit.
I actually think that Brexit's not going to be a deciding issue at the next election in the way it was in 2019. I think the fact that he feels confident to say that Labour wouldn't rejoin the single market shows to the degree to which the issue's actually fairly settled in public opinion. It's really not something that really divides people and gets them worked up in the way it did in the Corbyn era.
Well, let's talk about people getting worked up. A lot of them work in Parliament and they get very worked up, and they to the point where they start fiddling with people and they start. She's wondering where I was going.
Yeah, I didn't know. I thought we were going to protests or where we're going. Yeah, so
no,
pinching.
But you know, I mean, it seems to be a pressure pot. What are those called? What are those cookers called?
Pressure cooker.
Pressure cooker. It's a pressure cooker, isn't it?
It's a pressure cooker for molestation.
Yes, and for molestation and goodness knows what. What the heck is it? I tell you, drink's got to play a part.
I do think it's an unusual workplace.
Yeah.
You know, the long hours, the late nights, people are away from their families, drink plays a part.
I think that's an easy excuse.
Well, yeah, and I think it also is the kind of job that attracts a certain kind of person who's very interested in power. But I would caveat that by saying that there are many other workplaces where this kind of thing goes on. And the fact is, politicians are more accountable than people who work in other industries like journalism or like banking or any kind of job where there's huge imbalances of power.
Can we talk about the protests? Priti Patel saying she's going to use these new police powers to potentially send people who are upset with the price of fuel at the moment to jail for 6 months.
I think it's very understandable that people are extremely frustrated with these protests. Drivers have it bad enough already, £100 to fill up your
Not
car.
according to our inbox this morning, everybody seems to be supportive of these protests.
Yes,
Outraged that the fuel hasn't been dealt with by the government properly.
So these people are seen as heroes?
Yeah, they're saying, look, it's not like the eco-warriors and Extinction Rebellion. It's totally different.
Yeah, I do think that it's certainly a more sympathetic cause, and there is things that the government could do. It's obviously never a good idea to sort of give in to people who are causing civil disruption, but the government, 40% of the price of fuel is VAT and duty.
I definitely get what the folk are doing, and they're doing it for people who feel they just don't have a voice. Whether I would feel the same understanding if I was stuck behind them on the M4 or the M5, that's a whole other thing.
Well, and, it's not just drivers trying to get to work, it's ambulances, it's people delivering food.
Trying to get off on your holidays.
Trying to get your kids to school. I don't really support this kind of direct action. I think it's ultimately counterproductive. I think you lose sympathy.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are you getting there? What are you getting there? People are saying, Mark says, I totally agree with you, Eamon. Look, there's somebody else that agrees with me. Does nobody ever agree with you? I totally agree with you again, Eamon. I get stuck behind loads of stupid people everywhere. We're talking about airports. But he says he does them at banks, supermarkets, and they make an easy job hard. Well, I'm for you there, Mark. We're talking about motorways now.
Duncan says fuel duty needs to be scrapped altogether. They can have the VAT, but the additional paper mile needs to go. Stephen in Lancashire says, in principle, I accept the right to protests by citizens. I have a problem with some style of protests because they disproportionately harm citizens.
Yeah.
My wife is a care worker, writes Brian. She needs fuel for her job. At the end of the week, she's out of pocket. The firm she works for does give her a fuel allowance, but it's not enough to keep her going. So he's clearly supportive of the protest.
Oh, this is brilliant. This is from Leicester. Not from Leicester, the city. This is Leicester, as in Leicester Piggott, but it's not him either. What? Lester, right? So it's... Go, Eamon. I completely agree with your frustration with people at airports. Same as people, and he's absolutely right here, same as people that get to a toll booth on the M6 and start looking, how am I going to pay this?
Oh, I've got a story.
I've got a story too. It's not as if it's not been signposted.
I know, but what if you're already at the signpost and you realise you don't have a means of paying? What are you supposed to do? Do a U-turn on the M5 toll bridge?
That's for coins or that's for cash, that's for cards.
Before you could pay with cards. I got myself in trouble at the M5 toll booth trying to get into Wales.
My wife was having a furious row with me in the car one day, and the children.
How unlike you two.
How unlike us. She was having a few, and she was being critical of me, and she, of course, she hates being in a car that she doesn't drive whenever she's driving it. And we get to the M6 toll booth, whatever it is, and she gets to a place where she hadn't got a card or whatever it was, but the attendant was brilliant. He wound up, he said, are you stupid? He said, what a... And I started bursting out laughing. He was brilliant.
You should have leapt to her defence.
He was so rude. He was brilliant. He was just brilliant. He must face idiots all day.
How Ruth copes with you.
And then she couldn't reverse out because there were cars behind her.
Well, exactly. So what did they do? They let her through?
He just laughed. No, but he had to. I got out and I soothed the ways. And I said, look, what do you need? What do you need to get out here? Whatever it is. And then I gave my card. And off we went, and we went.
You saved the day.
Again,
what a hero.
Again, I saved the day.
Ruth, you're so long-suffering.
Because also I read signs in advance and understand them.
Perhaps you could have provided the wherewithal and the means.
I was enjoying it too much. We're going to say
thank you to
really
Alys Denby,
seeing you.
Deputy Editor of CapX. I'm sure we'll see you again very soon.
Thanks, Alys.
We're going to turn our attention